Hi, I'm Juanita and welcome back to the Knit Guru. Is this even my channel if we do not have a Chaos Car unboxing? This is not a video I had planned for now, but I thought this would take longer to arrive. So, this is the Chenille Granny Square Blanket Kit, free pattern included, value ball from Spotlight. Now, the reason I got this is that I have tried the Red Heart Granny all-in-one Granny Square yarn, and that was really cool, and it worked really well, so I wanted to give this a go. So, as I was saying, I have tried the Red Heart one, and I liked the Red Heart one. But the Red Heart one I'd heard of before, and I watched Passionate Kelsey because she went through it and she made it work for her using a 6mm crochet hook. Now, in New Zealand, we don't get the fun ones unless, like, they're really expensive and they come out late. Like, I think I was like 6 months late to the party on the Granny all-in-one, and it was still like $20 a ball or $25 a ball. It was stupidly expensive for what I could get when I got it. We still can't get the Flower Power one over here, so you know. So the fact that I saw this and this Granny Square Chenille kit thing from Spotlight, I think it was $60. And for $60, what we've got is we've got 12 balls, and these balls, I think, I'm fairly certain it's going to be centre pull. Yes, there's like a yellowy orange on the inside. I did think it was going to be more orange than it is, and then it's some greys and some whites and some blacks, so it's fairly neutral. There were two other shades. I think there was a pinky one and there was a greeny one, and there was this one. So there's 12 balls in the packet, and it comes with instructions. So what my plan is going to be is to have a go at doing this. What they're wanting us to do with this one is use a 6mm crochet hook, starting each ball of yarn from the center, chain 6, join with a slip stitch to form a ring. I suppose it is chenille yarn, so maybe that makes sense. What I will do is I don't like following the instructions. Right, okay. So what I do have is my handy dandy set of crochet hooks and sharp pointies. Now I do have, I think this is a 6mm hook. So I have a 6mm. I also have a 7mm. I use the 7mm quite a bit for doing granny hexagon cardigans. And what's that one? I do also have this one, which is my new hook. I'm very excited about this one, but I haven't actually used it yet. This is my Clover Amour 5.5. So I've got options. So what are our instructions? Okay, so we're doing trebles. Here's the bit that confuses me, though. I think I'm going to have to look at the picture, because this is saying treble crochet, but it might be that this is just giving us the UK terms, because a UK treble is a US double, I think. And we're slip stitching and we're chaining, and yeah. Okay, here's my initial concerns with this. It says that tension is not crucial for this project. I think you'll find that it is. It does say that each one of these squares is going to be 27 by 27 centimeters using a 6mm hook. So I guess what I'm going to have to do is make up a square following their instructions. I'm trying to look at the picture to work out whether or not I think they're actual trebles or actual doubles. I think they're double. I think those are doubles. I'm 90% certain these are doubles. But this picture here does make it look like there's quite a bit of gappage going on. So I'm going to follow the instructions. I'm going to use my 6mm hook, and I'm going to make a granny square cluster. Looking at the picture, it does look as though, if we have a look at this one here, there's definitely some color bleed happening along this corner here. So I'm not anticipating it being perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And it does seem, looking at the picture, that some of the center yellowy orangey bits do have white, and some of the center yellow orangey bits don't, but the next round of white does have bits of orange. So yeah. Okay. Does that like a... What concerns me I'm just looking at it thinking, it looks like these rows here are more naked. Like they're just... They don't look like trebles. Like these here look like just 2 doubles rather than 3 stitches in there. So is that what's happening? So round 7 is chain 1, work 1 round of slip stitch into each stitch of the 6th round, slip stitch into the first chain at the beginning of the round, fasten off. So 1 slip stitch into each of the... It wants me to slip stitch around the last round. So round 5 and 6 continue as set out on previous rounds. Okay, and then round 4, it's saying chain 6, which counts as 1 treble and 3 chain spaces. So there's 3 in the corner, 3 treble in the same chain space, 1 chain, 3 treble in the next chain space twice. So they're still saying that there's 3 stitches in each of there, but that there looks to me like there's only 2. So I'm calling shenanigans. I'm calling my shenanigans early. So what's my issues? I think that I feel like this is Valuable Chenille. Never heard of it. What a quality brand, Spotlight brand. It says bargain galore. So my concerns are as follows. 1, the chenille is going to shed like no other, and I'm going to get little bits everywhere. Number 2, it's going to be really difficult to get the colours to line up, and I don't think that it's necessarily going to be the right size hook. Number 3, I'm concerned that because it doesn't say whether it's using US or UK sizing, that I actually don't know exactly what the instructions are. I'm very concerned about slip stitching an entire round. I am not slip stitching an entire round. I would single crochet a whole way around, but I'm not going to slip stitch a whole way around. And it also just says to stitch them together. I would like to think there's enough yarn in the ball to stitch them together at the very end, because it being a chenille yarn means that I can't just stitch it together with anything. It's going to just stand out like dog's bollocks. So there's that. However, if it works, what it's going to end up as being is a cozy granny blanket made cheaply, because 60 New Zealand dollars is what, 30 US dollars, and it doesn't feel awful. Right, there's nothing for it. Let's just give this a go. Yeah, we'll just have to give this a go. Yeah. I'm stalling now, but I'm going to get out of the car and give this a go. It's not really an unboxing unless I'm in the car, let's be completely honest. Let's crochet. Right, so this is putting it together with their instructions. Chaining 6 is terrible. That is a massive giant gaping hole in the middle of my crochet. I'm just not, no. That is a no. I am going to undo it. Undoing it did lead to quite a bit of shedding because this yarn really doesn't like being frogged. However, at least I have managed to get a square done. There's going to be some tips. Sometimes I've run out of yarn, like right there at the end of a round, and it's just ridiculous. Like, it's so annoying and it's so ridiculous because it doesn't need to be this way. I mean, I do hips coming later on in this video, so don't stress too much about it. It is possible to do this. So back on this project, this is the Spotlight Granny Square yarn. I'm not exactly sure how it's going because all of these squares are not exactly the same. I've stopped measuring them because I've been trying to sort out the gauge. But what's crazy is that there's this massive long yellow tail that seems to be different on each one of them that I am trying to line up with the first color change. And then there's definitely too much of the white. And then on this one, everything else kind of works fine, except you will notice that this background is very tight. I had to tighten my tension just to get enough yarn for the background. I've tried not to chop anything excess off. Some of them I have. Here's another one where there's less yellow, there's still a lot of white, and now there's some pale grey that I haven't been able to deal with. Mostly with the pale grey, I had to, there's an awful bit there. So I picked up my excess and I pulled my excess through to make up for the factory knot issue there. So that's probably the most successful square. We've got this one where, again, it's a lot of the yellow and then a lot of the white and then nothing else. This next one here, this is one of the early ones where I have actually trimmed the ends. There's everything except the black has too much yarn, and this one is a tighter gauge than some of the others, but the overall size is not too disparate. Here's another early one, and there's actually too much black in this one, and this black grows quite loose compared to the other black grows. And then this one, is this the one I just did this morning? No, this is not the one I just did this morning. The one I just did this morning, I managed to line up almost everything. But even when trying to line up almost everything, like, there's a massive long yellow tail at the start. The other thing that's annoying with this yarn, and I need to talk about it now before I carry on, and you'll see why. Let's just try and get the end of this yarn out. The yarn is definitely clearly centre pull, because that's how the colours are on the balls. So if I fetch around in there and pull out my yellow from my centre, what we've got here, big wad of yellow. Okay, now here's the bit that's just a little bit nuts. How it's joined is just like this. It's like it's sewn with an invisible thread. You know what I mean by invisible thread, like it's that very thin nylon that's like in the center of the yarn, and it's just sewn with a zigzag across those two sections. So this here is quite a different length for each of the balls so far. It doesn't make any sense because where there are factory knots, the factory knots have been glued. So it could have just been glued and not have this transition piece. So I don't know why it's like this. This just must have been easier or something. But it does mean that all the pieces are individually done. When there is a factory knot or an issue or a flaw in the yarn and you have to work around it, sometimes there's enough yarn and sometimes there's not. When it's black, you kind of just have to roll with it. When it's one of the other colours, there's usually some sort of fat in the system. The other thing is that you can't frog it that often, because every time you frog it, as with any plush yarn, you start losing some of the fibres. So you end up crocheting very gently, and then when you start losing some of the fibres, you sort of have to go, well, I'm stuck with it just the way it is because I can't frog it anymore to go back and change my tension to try and get it to line up differently. The other issue is that every time you frog it, it gets longer, which is fine if you're short of yarn, But if you've got too much yarn and you're going back to try and loosen up your tension, you can loosen it way, way up and then get to the end and find that you've got the same amount left over because it's now just stretched out. So it's just frustrating. I am going to finish it because I am a completionist. And how many of these have I now done? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have finished half of the granny squares. I hate working with it so much. Just so much. It's a horrible, horrible thing to do. I'm having to use the 7mm hook at this point because it's the one that comes out the closest. But I just hate it. So even just sitting down and doing 1 square a day, I can't bring myself to do it because you do need to be in the right mindset to be able to try and get the tension right to make things happen. And because all the lengths are different and differently wrong, yeah, there is also a massive amount of white yarn at the end of the row. It says in the instructions to do a row of slip stitches all the way around the edge of the square, but all I can see that's going to do is make the edge of the square really tight. So I haven't done that. I'm leaving that till the end because it doesn't come with a plain ball of white to do the seaming and to stitch everything up. So I figure I'm going to have to use this white to stitch everything up. Oh, that's the other thing. This white is a cool white and this white is a warm white. So I can't even use these ends to stitch it up at the end because it's a different shade of white. I don't know whether or not it's going to pick up on camera. On camera, it almost comes out the opposite. But there's a cool white and there's a warm white. And here's another factory knot issue that I could deal with because it's in that last row. But actually, all I'm going to do is just sort of tuck it in and make it go away. Because when I saw it there this morning, I was like, you know what? No more fucks to give. Yeah, so that's where we're up to on that one. We're halfway through making the granny squares, so the end is in sight. But there's so many other projects that I'm working on that I would rather do than sit down and just try and crank that out. But I will get that cranked out and finished as soon as possible, really. So here's just some aesthetic shots of my squares. Mainly size up your hook because it feels like at least a 7mm is required, and even then you're still not going to meet gauge easily. So it's going to be a frustration project. Well, I've left this too late in the day. To be fair, I was still in my pyjamas until recently, and it is only 9, but the wind has gotten up because New Zealand in the autumn. I have now finished all of these plush granny squares from a Spotlight bag. Here's the issue. It actually doesn't matter what your tension is. There is random lengths of yarn. Sometimes, more often than not, there's not enough black. Yellow, that's an easy enough one to work around because you can just start it later on, but this is a ridiculous tail and this is one of the shorter ones. But for every colour to be out by a weird amount, with this white one, there is no way on God's green earth that I could crochet this any looser to use up this tension. So I'm going to be darning in ends for time immemorial, and that defeats the purpose of having a granny square yarn where the colours are already all attached. I may as well have bought the yarn separately and just done some maths to work out how much of each colour I was going to require. But the squares are done, and I think I've done them all. It got to the point where I don't like working with this yarn. All of the yarns are a different texture. This grey one's quite nice. The yellow one's fine. This outside white one is horrible. How are they all so different? Maybe it's just the dye. Who knows? I haven't done the last row of slip stitches all the way around because I think slip stitches aren't going to be adding any length. And I still need something to sew the whole thing up with. And so my issue with granny square yarn packs that are advertised as being this is everything you need for the blanket is that it's not thinking about how you're actually joining them all. And there's no instructions for join as you go or any of that stuff. So there's that. I have been taking a ball of this with me pretty much any time I go out, in the hopes that I will just whip up a granny square. But unlike the red heart one, where once you get your tension right, you're good to go, and you can just crank out a granny square on the run when you've got, 20 minutes, you're fine. This stuff, there's frogging and there's adjusting and there's dealing with all these tails because the lengths of yarn are completely random. So hopefully I've found all of my squares. I can't find another ball that's not crocheted yet, so I'm thinking I'm done and I'm ready to start laying them out and stitching them together and working out what to do around the outside. We'll see how we go. Oh, I am blessed with a Rocky that you can't see, but he's running around in his jumper. Yes, you're a good boy, you silly sausage. Wish me luck dealing with this yarn. Right, so the plan here is to lay out all my squares and to just do a surface slip stitching them all together, where you pick up one little edge piece from each side and just do a slip stitch along them. I did this by doing all the vertical ones, and then I went down the other way and did the horizontal ones. I can't tell you whether or not this is a good idea. It's just what I decided to do because I didn't want to deal with weaving in any more ends. And I tell you, there is a lot of end weaving in my future. So I'm like surface crocheting across these squares, mostly because I don't think that this plush yarn is going to hold up to actually stitch them. So I'm trying to put it together to just surface crochet it flat across all of them. But yeah, then I'll see what I've got left in the way of this pile of yarn ends to do some sort of border, because there's no instruction for a border in the pack. But honestly, because there's so many loose ends, it's just taking an absolute age to get this far, and we're a long way from finished. Right, through some mastery of YouTube there, all my squares are now surface crocheted together down the middle, and I'm quite happy with them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to do some scallopy, fan stitchy bits on them. So basically I've got one scallopy fan thing that starts in, well, the centre of it's in the centre of each treble. It's just what looked the best. I can't tell you it's necessarily the easiest way of doing things. Once that's all done, I'm mostly done with all of the yarn, so all I have to do is darn in 100,000 million ends. Granny square magic yarn, my foot. Alright, so welcome back to the Knit Guru, and this is my Spotlight plush granny square blanket. Now, you're probably thinking it looks quite good, because from a distance it looks great. Am I dropping bits of fluff as I jiggle? Yes I am. What are my complaints? I mean, you've probably seen some of them already, but the colour changes are inequitable, and not just tension issues, because I've tried everything from changing hook size between rounds to going free ball, through to doing everything I can to even put extra double crochets in to make it work. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but they're all different. Like the yellow length in particular, sometimes you've got a short tail and it just creates this nice little one. Sometimes you get this massive long tail and it doesn't matter what you do, you just end up with it bleeding over, but you kind of need it to bleed over because then there's not enough of the white. Some of them, the edge bit was really rough and hard to work. Some of it, the edge bit was really lovely. One of them, the white edge bit, had this much of a tail left. And when I got that one, I was really concerned there wasn't going to be enough yarn to stitch it up, because while this was a blanket kit, it came with the 12 balls. Now the balls themselves, at least you can see in the video, that this is like a soft warm white and this is a bright white. So the colours of white are just different unnecessarily. Now, what was I saying? The balls themselves, there's 12 of them. The way the colours are joined together isn't like the red heart one where it's dyed. It's literally spliced together. Some of the splices are long splices, some of them are just short splices. It's just spliced together with like the nylon thread that runs through the middle of the plush yarn. This means that you can undo it. By the last 2 or 3, I just started undoing it because it was getting too difficult to get the tension right. And sometimes we're talking there's an extra 2 meters of a color over what you need, which is ridiculous, like completely ridiculous. And then other times there's just not enough and you're having to do like a super tight last round, in particularly the black or the white, to get it right. But the instructions didn't have anything to say how to seam them together or what to do to finish off the blanket. So according to the instructions, you were supposed to start with about a 10 centimeter tail for the yellow and do the chain start, which I did that. Sometimes I started with more like, 2 feet, 60 centimeters. The distance within my viewfinder, if nothing else, just to make the yellow line up. So I could generally make the yellow and white transition line up because that just depended on when you started the yellow. However, you couldn't do too much frogging because as soon as you frog this yarn, it drops bits like there's no tomorrow. Ridiculous. Fortunately, there was enough of the white on a lot of the balls that's what I used to seam up all the pieces, and then there was enough left over to go around the outside. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether it's all the soft white or whether there's any of the bright white in the outside. I've tried not to include the bright white, but I think I've got maybe a small wound up ball, yay sized, of the white left. Now, it doesn't seem to matter how I darn in these ends, they keep popping back up again. So I've got to work that one out. Am I happy with it? I'm happy that it's done. I'm happy that I gave it a go. It was a $60 blanket, which for most of you, you're American, so half the price of that, and a little bit more because often things cost more simply because they've got to get here. So it's probably going to be maybe a $40, $50 package in Australia or a $30 package if you had Spotlight in the United States. Is it worth it? No, because I ended up darning in so many ends and I could have had a much cleaner finish and a more accurate finish and better tension throughout each of the squares if I had just bought the individual colours. The only part of this that I would say was convenient is that when I wanted to throw a ball of something in my bag and go off for the day, I could do that. You still had to focus on it. It's not like when you zone in and you're doing sock knitting or even the Red Heart Granny all-in-one yarn, where once you get your tension right, you can just zone in and you're good to go. It was very much a case of having to keep a watch of how much you've got left, so it wasn't like you could just zone out. But at least it was something that you could take and sit and wait places and work on. None of the squares took a particularly long time. Maybe 30 minutes a square. A bit longer anytime it was a big issue to have to keep frogging and unfrogging. Or a little bit shorter if it was perfect, but none of them were perfect. So it could have been done in a weekend if it wasn't so damn frustrating. It also was at least 2 hours of darning in ends for something that's an instant granny yarn project that shouldn't be 2 hours of darning in ends. I should have been darning in 12 yellow ends, maybe at most 12 white ends, and then whatever it is to stitch it up. What I would recommend for Spotlight to make this a better project, because it's got a lot of merit to what's going on in this kit. The fact that it's all there in one, and it says the final dimensions are wrong. I could not make my square meet their square. And I didn't do the final round of slip stitches around the outside of each square because I thought that was pointless when I needed that yarn to be able to stitch it up. What I would say, Spotlight, is this. Get your measurements accurate. If you're going to be joining them together, make sure that it's the same amount of yellow, the same amount of bright white, the same amount of grey, so that then when we are trying to figure out our tension,
that we're good to go. Also, size up your hook. I ended up using a 7mm hook to do this project, and it was asking for something like a 5 or a 5.5. I've since lost the instructions. So it would have been a lot tighter, and I would have had a lot more left over if I had just stuck with their hook, and then I would have struggled with the tension. So I totally recommend having somebody look at this and redo it. Your manufacturing process is off because the joins are inaccurate. They're all at different lengths. The other thing I would do is I would throw in 2 balls of white, or a ball of grey and a ball of white. Something to say, here's the one you're going to use for stitching up, and here's the one you're going to use for doing the end. Now, I could have done a double crochet border all the way around, but I decided on scallops. Sue me. There were no instructions as for anything. It just said seam them up. But that isn't really a finished blanket. It needs an edge in order to just tidy up those squares, because they're not overly square. They're not completely symmetrical. I didn't block them because everything about this project was frustrating. So Spotlight, throw in a couple of extra just plain balls of the white so that we can, and get some instructions. A row of single crochet, a row of double crochet with 3 double crochets in the corner or whatever. Give some instructions as to how you want this to finish up, because you're advertising it as an easy beginner project, and there's nothing easy or beginner about this project. It would be much easier to go in and just purchase the yarn. So I almost think that people should do that. Now, if you are just going in to purchase the yarn, you're probably going to want to do 1 ball of the orange, 2 balls of the next one, 3 balls of the next one, 4 balls of the next one, 5 balls, 6 balls of the outside one, and then another 2 balls for finishing up. So you can do this yourself. I do not think a granny square project works well in a plush yarn, because the plush yarn, it's really difficult to weave in those ends and make them stick. The advantage in wool is that when you start weaving in those ends, you can felt them together with where it's touching, so it's not going to come unraveled and you're not going to see the end. The other advantage, if you've got an acrylic yarn, is that you can splice it through itself with a sharp needle and it's not going to come undone either. But with a plush yarn, you have to end up using a large holed plastic needle and then working around it, so it's always going to try and unravel itself. You're constantly going to have to tie little knots. And then there's bits where, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, the inner nylon thread of this yarn is just fraying out, probably from excessive frogging, or that's on the end of a join. So there's a lot of going through and trimming that off. Do I recommend you buy the Spotlight all-in-one granny? No? I mean, it's cheap, and it looks like it makes a good gift, but it really doesn't, because it's a lot of frustration. And at the end, you've got a small lap blanket. This is not a large blanket at all. It is maybe a cot size, but even then you wouldn't want to give it to a baby because the gaps are too large. So I can't work out what this project is for. If I give it to the dog, he's just going to wreck it. If I give it to the cat's definitely going to wreck it. I could put it on a bed. I could put it over the back of a chair, but that's really about it. It's not large enough to use as a lap gown. It's not large enough to use as a blanket. The holes are too big, and it's too heavy for a baby. All those things. I can't actually work out what would be good about this project. Yeah, but if you've got one, here's my tips. Size up your hook to at least a 7mm hook. When you get to the end of your granny rounds, just cut your losses, unravel the colours, and go again. Sometimes they're going to line up, but even when they line up, you're going to end up with a bit that's double chunky. You're much better off to just get to the end, split it, move to start your next colour. Sometimes you're not going to have quite enough to get around that next time. Sometimes you are going to have enough. Keep your yarn scraps just in case you need to change it up. Do not do the last round of slip stitches. That's after the white you're supposed to do, after the trebles, or not trebles, after the double granny clusters. all the way around. You're supposed to do a row of slip stitches around each of these squares. Don't do that. Save that yarn for stitching up your ends, or stitching up your blanket and potentially doing a border. I did scallops, and my scallops are the center of every treble. They could be the center of the gaps, but I went for the center of each treble because I felt like that was going to work better with the pattern. It would also, I would have had enough yarn here also to just do double crochets all the way around, and if I had done that, I would have put 5 double crochets in the corner, and I think, yeah, there still would have been enough yarn for that. So those are my tips if you've already got this yarn and you've got this project and you're struggling with it. And I do know that there are a lot of people who have bought this and are struggling with it. I am going to put it somewhere in my house when my house is finished. But I don't really know where. I don't really know why. One of my spare bedrooms is going to be orange, so it might go in there just as over the back of a chair. But to be honest, this isn't really an orangey orange. It's more of a yellow. It looks mustard in the screen, but it's definitely more of a pale tangerine in real life. We'll go with that. All right, so if you see it and it's on a very cheap special, like if they're doing this yarn pack clearance for $20, probably worth it. At $60, you're just going to be facing too much frustration. Just so much frustration. Everything about this yarn is annoying. Yeah. So, without further ado, I will leave you with that, and I will catch you next week. Bye.